how do we determine what the clearance size particle or the ISO codes is? The question I hear often, I'm sure you both as well, is, or I have somebody say, I need a 10 micron filter. What do you say whenever you hear that? Because we want to direct the conversation towards monitoring and mitigating and controlling the clearance size particles in that system. What do you say when somebody tells you that? Curtis, I need a 10 micron filter.
Usually when you hear something like that, that's an opportunity to kind of step back and help somebody understand what they're really asking for. So when somebody says I need a 10 micron filter, they really need to understand what they're trying to accomplish. So you have to start talking about, okay, all right, well, we have 10 micron filters. Why do you need that? So let's start talking about your system. And what I always do is I talk about the most sensitive component in the system. So first of all, 10 micron can mean a lot of things. There are various different sufficiencies of a 10 micron. A 10 micron cellulose filter might catch 1 out of every 2 10 micron particles that come up to it. It's 50% efficient. Or a 10 micron filter could be one that's a beta 4000. So for every 4,000 particles that come up to it, 1 gets through. So first of all, the idea of 10 micron, you kind of need to help somebody understand that doesn't necessarily mean much, but it gives you an opportunity to start talking to them about their system. And you need to zero in on, all right, what's the most sensitive component in your system? Because the most sensitive component in the system is going to drive everything else. And it's going to have the tolerances that we're going to work with. So if we can look at, like when I talk about the most sensitive one, it's the one with the finest tolerances. If I can get the oil clean enough for that, I know it's going to be clean enough for everything else. So that's usually a starting point of a conversation. They're at least thinking about filtration and wanting to get their oil cleaner. They know they need to do something. But it's just a beginning. It's just a place to start. It's usually a good place where you can start an education process and you can start asking some questions. But just that question alone tells me essentially nothing. If somebody says I need a 10 micron filter, they just know they need a filter, and it's a starting point for a conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. I want to get Richard's take too, but basically what I'm hearing is we don't just take their word for it and just quote them a 10 micron filter. We start prying, basically. What do you do?
Usually I laugh.
All right.
Mainly in homage to a ex-coworker of ours, because on a call with him years ago when a statement like that was made, he said his socks are a 10 micron filter. So if you think about it, anything that has fibers in it could capture almost any size particle. It may only capture, as Curtis was mentioning a while ago, 1 out of 50. It could capture 3,000 out of 3,001. So since most any fiber can remove some quantity of any particle size, the conversation really needs to be, how clean is my fluid? But more importantly, on what Curtis was saying, how clean does the oil need to be in order for the components within that system to achieve their design life? And one thing that struck me as interesting years ago, I was trying to figure out what the design life was for a hydraulic piston pump. And in a conversation with one of the smartest fluid power engineers I ever knew, he told me that all of these life calculations on hydraulic components are bearing L10 life calculations. And if you think about it, hydraulic components are nothing more than bearing fits. Regardless of what the component is, whether it's a piston pump, a hydraulic cylinder, everything is a bearing fit. And then you start thinking about how clean does the fluid need to be so that, as Curtis was mentioning earlier, we don't get enough particles in between those clearance fits to cause abrasion, which then leads to greater clearances, and then from there you get higher inefficiencies of the hydraulic components, and it typically manifests itself in heat and premature failures.
You're definitely taking that conversation away from that 10 micron statement and starting to pry and ask questions, because it ultimately, like you both said, we have an ISO code limit that the system should operate under. And we call it a limit, not a target, because a target is something to achieve and a limit is something to avoid. So it's a limit. We have to determine what that limit is And then when we determine what that limit is, like you said, based on the most limiting component, then we need to determine if what efficiency media is required. And just looking at media grades doesn't tell the full picture. The operating conditions of the system are a factor as well, like ingression rate and other factors like that. So just a 10 micron filter it's an invitation, if you ask me, to start a conversation.